Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back. Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer, going to talk about some of the current energies relative to this week and next week, and I suppose what's been leading up really the last few days. So, there's a Grand Cross taking place. It's a Cardinal Grand Cross. A Grand Cross is a configuration between four or more planets, and in this case, it's a cardinal Grand Cross, which composes Juno in Libra, Pluto and Saturn in Capricorn, Venus in Cancer, and Mars in Aries. And that's why it's a cardinal Grand Cross, because all those planets are in cardinal signs. Libra, Aries, Cancer, and Capricorn are the four cardinal points of the zodiac. And so we have some really important energies floating around in these cardinal signs coming together in the formation of what's called a grand cross. Some people are born with this configuration in their chart. And if they are, it speaks to very specific, life patterns, themes, and signatures throughout the course of their entire life. But this is an energy pattern that's really prominent and relevant to all of us just for a couple of weeks' time, you could say, um, both personally and also, on the collective level as well. And so the bodies involved speak to relationship dynamics specifically, our own personal sense of safety and security, our own personal desires, and some of the frustrations therein at the moment that we may encounter and face relative to what we need to overcome, evolve, and grow through. Now, these sorts of transits that only last for a week or so, sometimes, one might say, well, how much can I really transform a big component of my life in just a week's time? And the answer is that that usually doesn't happen. But what does happen is that relative to other things that are going on in your birth chart and in your life, then a, a transit of this nature that comes through with this particular pattern formation will just be the, you could say, activation point, right, to what will enable a flow of energy of things that have actually been working their way through for quite some time. So these shorter transits are generally windows that assist this process of transformation or release or letting go or evolving or growing relative to what you are actually working on and have been working on for quite some time. So that's the way to kind of think about it. So we are looking at relationship material because we have Venus involved. Venus is that body in the chart that correlates to love specifically. Um, but she speaks to our needs, our personal needs, okay? Specifically around worth, love, value, care, nurture, and things like that. Obviously, our own values, how we share ourselves with others in relationships, what we're looking for in relationships. She's the magnetic force and principles. So she speaks to what we attract in our life and things of that nature. And then, of course, in the sign of Cancer, she's been in Cancer for the last few weeks. She's getting ready to leave Cancer, but before she leaves Cancer, she's come into this Grand Cross pattern formation in the heavens with all these other bodies. So there's some tension points there, which can also be points of growth as well. It just depends on our own level of awareness and how ready we are to work with the energies that show up. Um, Cancer is a sign of our own personal self image, our own inner security, our vulnerabilities, our needs, our desire to be nurtured and to nurture others, right? And it's home life, of course. So it really does take us back into deeper components of ourself, and we can say soul life, because I believe that the three water houses, being Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces, or even those three signs, they all speak to components and aspects of the soul. The soul um, emanates through, vibrates through the element of water, which is what takes us in and under, right? Hence why the soul is not something we can see out there in the physical. It's something that we need to feel, right? Resonate with from an inner level. And the three water houses take us into those inner levels. So Venus in Cancer has this quality about her, taking us into these deeper levels within ourselves, but through a Cancerian filter, which has got very much to do with looking at our own sense of safety and security. Now, the Mars, don't worry about the house location of where everything is, because this will naturally change based on your own, current location. So the houses are not important at this stage, but we just need to assess and understand just the configuration of this pattern. So Mars in Aries, as we know, for a start, Mars is slowing down at the moment. In Aries, Mars is total speed. It's the sprinter in terms of running, right? It's an energy that can't really be contained. It's very powerful, for better or for worse. It's a very heroic type of energy. It's very fast. It's very impulsive. It's very hot-headed, and it's very ready to act and move on things, with a great sense of impulse. So anyway, it's slowing down because it's going to go retrograde in a few days' time. On the 9th of September, Mars will be stationary retrograde, and I've actually done an entire session on that. So please watch the Mars retrograde video if you want to know more about that subject alone. But Mars in Aries in this configuration is really significant because he's getting ready to slow down. He's in his own sign, Aries, so he's in rulership, so he's quite dignified, but he's pulling in some tension there towards Venus in Cancer. And he's also opposite because he's actually, Mars is forming a square to Venus, right? So squares are always incredibly dynamic points of energy that can produce a lot of results, but they can also produce a lot of internal frustration, right? Because the energy needs to be channeled, it needs an outlet, it needs an active outlet. And when it's not finding that outlet and that pathway, it gets internalized and can become this incredible source of frustration and anger. Mars rules anger, right? So we have two principles here relating to the masculine and the feminine, Venus feminine, Mars masculine, which really does speak to our own inner feminine and masculine. But then, of course, it speaks to the nature of our relationships as well, relative to if I'm a woman and I'm having a relationship with a man, well, then it's going to speak to that, domain, that area of life, that experience, that nature of reality, right? Um, Mars is also forming an opposition to Juno. As you can see, Juno up here, she's in the sign of Libra, and she recently went direct. So Mars is square Venus. Mars is square Venus. Mars is opposite Juno, and Mars is square the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, right? And then, of course, Pluto and Saturn are opposite Venus. Pluto and Saturn are square Juno. So hence the Grand Cross. You can literally see that this is a cross. If I was to draw a line from Juno to Mars, there's one line. If I'm to draw a line from Venus to Saturn, Pluto, there's another line, and hence the configuration of a cross. So that's made up of four squares, as you can see: Juno to Saturn, Pluto, Pluto, Saturn to Mars, Mars to Venus. There's one, two, three, there's four squares, right? And then we also have two major oppositions, which is the opposition from Saturn Pluto to in Capricorn to Venus in Cancer, and then we have the other major opposition from Mars in Aries to Juno in Libra. So the energy here is made up of oppositions and squares, which are incredibly dynamic aspects. And so this Grand Cross holds all this energy together. All these energies need to find some sense of cooperation, right? Some sense of balance, some sense of peace. but it's not easily attained, although it is possible, because the inherent underlying energy is the tension of the square, which is friction and frustration. So we've got to work through those energies to potentially and possibly achieve some sense of balance and harmony through the oppositions, right? So Juno, which is the principle of marriage. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to mean conventional marriage, in that, two people have, um, gone down the path of a conventional, traditional marriage, getting married in a church, or, um, you know, in those other places that people get married in where they just sign off documentation. That's still fairly traditional. Juno will speak to pretty much any relationship that has a foundational essence to it, which is about commitment, right? So that can be in a business partnership, and that can be, of course, in a personal relationship. The component that speaks to marriage is because she was married to Zeus, right, to Jupiter, and she had this sort of undying commitment, towards that marriage, that partnership, that commitment, and her husband, right? Regardless of everything she went through, she stood by him. So hence this principle of commitment comes through very, very strongly when we're working with the archetype of Juno. So Juno's in Libra, and that's the opposite sign of where she was found, relative to when she was discovered. When Juno was discovered, she was found in the sign of Aries, which is very fitting because she was quite a feisty, fiery sort of goddess. Because she was pretty pissed off most of the time throughout her experience with Zeus, right? And so when a body gets discovered in a particular sign, that sign really describes, the signatures and the energy of what's been born through that particular archetype, which describes the essence, the mythology, the story, the narrative of that particular body. So anyway, in Libra, she's quite well, in Libra, she's obviously seeking peace, right, and balance and fairness and equality in all her partnerships. But she's being faced off with an opposition to Mars in Aries, right? So, Mars in Aries just wants to do his own thing. He wants to act on his personal desires, take charge, take action, um, lead his own path, and he's going to sort of face off with Juno in Libra. It's Mars in Aries is I want to do my own thing, but I'm feeling um, really torn or really conflicted within myself because I can see my partner on the other side, and I can see perhaps what their point of view is or what they're trying to um, help me understand where the imbalances might occur in this partnership. And I'm sort of torn because I can recognize that, but I also feel these very strong impulses within myself to act on the Mars in Aries energy. And then of course we have Venus, which creates this T square basically before we bring in Pluto and Saturn. And so Venus is faced off both with the Juno and the Mars. So there's this incredible dynamic tension, all pointing to Venus, because Venus holds this configuration of the T square. And this is all to do with our own personal safety needs and security, and how that is being challenged at the moment relative to needing to be more direct, more open, more confronting, more courageous in those areas of our life, and also bringing in the element of balance as well. How is all this going to balance out? These are the challenges at the moment. And also with the Saturn Pluto interaction here in the picture, it's speaking to the bigger picture level of our own life relative to the nature of our own reality. Saturn is our own reality, how we perceive reality, regardless of what the consensus reality is out there, right? Saturn is what helps us construct our own reality, period. So at this point in time, with this configuration, Saturn opposite Venus is highlighting those dimensions within us from the point of view of what is my sense of safety and security, how do I feed that? Um, how do I sustain and feed that within myself versus the reality that I see out there at the moment, or the nature of the reality that I see? It's also a lot to do with emotional maturity, learning how to be more emotionally mature and stable in our own selves versus looking for others to feed us, sustain us, and nurture us from that real raw sort of basic level of Cancer, right? Because Cancer is not interested in investing in anything other than safety and security, which feeds that emotional, the raw emotional nature of Cancer, right? And so here it is faced off with Saturn, and it's being asked to have a look at its Venus. She's being asked to have a look at your own needs, have a look at your own insecurities, have a look at your own vulnerabilities. How can you take responsibility around those so you don't need to project the Saturn component out there on your partners or your relationships or the world in order to sustain you and give you that sense of security that you are so longing for, needing, or looking, right? For. Um, and of course, when we bring Pluto into this configuration, Pluto adds a whole other dimension and layer, which has got to do with the soul, right? The evolution of the soul. And in this picture, we're really drawing in a whole pattern relative to the components that I just touched on, and relative to what are we ready to really transform at this point in our life, relative to the nature of our personal desires, Mars in Aries, our own personal needs and inner safety and security, emotional maturity, Venus in Cancer, and Juno in Libra, relative to seeking this ultimate, perfect, sort of balanced partnership and relationship, which doesn't really exist because no partnership is perfect, and certainly no relationship is totally balanced all the time. We are constantly growing and evolving through every partnership we encounter, and we need to be able to see imbalances in order to correct them within ourselves. So Juno just kind of highlights any sort of imbalances that might be, present at the moment, but everything is highlighted in a pretty dynamic, tense sort of fashion, because we're talking about squares and oppositions, which are very, very dynamic. The squares, as I said, pointing to the frustrations, frictions, and challenges that pop up, where we might have some resistances, or where we might also have some breakthroughs, because squares can generate the psychological sort of stamina and strength to help us confront certain things that we otherwise wouldn't, because they push us out of our comfort zone and actually force us to take action on things. In addition to that, cardinal energy is all about action. Cardinal energy is not one that's going to sit back and take its time about anything. It's actually going to run full speed into things, right? And that can be a positive, because that might be the very thing that we need in a certain situation in our life at the moment, where we really need to have the courage to initiate something, to initiate a particular course of action, or to initiate towards a particular choice and decision that we need to make. So this cardinal energy gives us that fuel, right? That courage to initiate what that may be. On the other hand, if it works against us, as it were, it will be because we are too impatient, too hasty with our actions and choices, and we haven't given enough thought to it. And so that's where the problem lies when you're talking about cardinal energy. In addition to that, cardinal energy is about leadership, initiation, action, but it can also be challenged when it comes to when it takes that path of initiation relative to a particular choice, right? Um, it can struggle or be challenged to stay with it long enough to see it through. So that's the other challenging component of cardinal energy. And so these are the things that we need to really be sort of thinking about relative to our own personal circumstances at the moment, that might be really activated in a very dynamic way, in a very confronting way, in a very challenging way. There is certainly room for a lot of growth to come through this. There's certainly potential and opportunity for courage to be initiated through this, but we have to make sure that we're addressing all the elements involved and that we are actually taking personal responsibility for our own emotional needs and security, and not sort of projecting it out there as well. Because the Saturn being projected out there will be projected onto governments, systems, structures, forms, bosses, um, any sort of authoritative type figure, which at the moment, because of the state of the world, can feel like an experience of shit. My my sustainability, my well-being, my safety and security is so heavily impinged on what's happening out there in the world at the moment that how could I possibly feel safe? So these are the things that it could be bringing up. But what we need to understand is that the nature of reality is constantly changing as we are in our own evolutionary journey. And in truth, at the from the point of the ultimate truth, that is, our safety is not dependent on anybody else but ourselves. We are totally responsible for our own inner level of safety and security that we must ourselves nurture, sustain, and evolve and develop, regardless of the external circumstances that appear, that are very confronting and challenging and sometimes quite scary as well. They are all opportunities for our own growth, all of them, period. So, and just one final thing before I go, I think what we'll be feeding into this as well, for not necessarily every single person, but certainly for people who have prominent things in their chart in the sign of Cancer. The solar eclipse that we had in Cancer earlier this year, it was in July. July is not that long ago, it's only 2 months ago, and it was a solar eclipse and it was 0 degrees Cancer, right? So that solar eclipse, the energy of that hasn't dissipated, it hasn't completed. We are still within the vibration frequency of that particular solar eclipse, which was in Cancer. And, the bigger picture stuff, it's got to do with the nature of how safe we feel in the world at large. And clearly, most of us would probably say that in various aspects we don't feel very safe at all, which is completely understandable given the nature of reality at the moment. But anyway, point being that that energy is still quite active, quite strong in the ether of things, in the consensus reality, in the reality for most of us. So it's quite a amplified energy, and especially while Venus has been traveling in Cancer, she's highlighted all these issues. But in this grand square configuration, these issues have all been pulled in together, and they are issues that we are all being confronted with relative to our own personal circumstances at this present moment. Particularly, this energy would have started, you could say, even up to a week ago, perhaps. It's incredibly active right now as I speak, which is actually the 4th of September. But certainly the last couple of days, the energy of this would have started to amplify even more. Today, we can see that Mars and Venus are exactly square. They're both at 27 degrees. So today, yesterday, today, tomorrow, this energy is really, really amplified. And certainly for the next few days moving forward, particularly while Mars is getting ready to go retrograde on the 28th degree. We'll go retrograde at 28 degrees, okay, of Aries. So this is all being pulled in at the moment, and it's quite it's quite an intense energy. Even here in Melbourne at the moment, in Australia where I live, um, on this coming Saturday, which is tomorrow for us here in Australia, there's a very large protest that's supposed to go ahead. It was supposed to have around about 500,000 people. I doubt it's going to get that. The authorities have scared a lot of people off in various ways and so forth, which is the Saturn in Capricorn, of course, squaring the Mars in Cancer. The people are the Mars in Aries there, because the protest is basically a protest on freedom, right? And people wanting to feel their sense of sovereignty and freedom, right? Because no one is feeling that. In Melbourne, specifically in Australia, this is not happening throughout Australia, but it's been happening in Melbourne. We are in complete lockdown. We are only allowed to go outside of our house for up to an hour a day for exercise and or the supermarket or the doctor. That's it. That's the extent of our freedom. And this has been in place now for several weeks. So you can imagine the pent up frustration in this city. I know there are a lot of things going on in the whole entire world. I'm not oblivious to that, and I'm not pointing to Melbourne as being just the place that's experiencing this. These things are going on worldwide. I'm very well aware, but I'm just bringing it as an example because it's just something that I know about very well because I live here, right? So yeah. Um, anyway, these energies are certainly very challenging and very confronting for all of us at the moment in a number of different ways. And hopefully, what I've shared with you has given enough, at least, direction, pointers to have you reflect and consider on what's coming up for you at the moment and how this might relate to it and how you can work with this energy. Just remember, it's going to come back to balancing all these energies out, which is not an easy thing to do, but we can do it. We can do it, especially um, when we integrate awareness, obviously, and when we integrate some balance here with how we're going to work with these energies, and also to show courage, but to also be aware of others and to know that we need to cooperate. We need to be cooperative because the antagonistic nature of these types of dynamics in a square aspect can prove to be counterproductive if we don't give consideration and we don't reflect on our own behavior, our own action, and so forth, and what we are projecting, and how much ownership and responsibility can we take around that, both mentally and emotionally. So those are my thoughts, guys. Just wanted to share that with you because it just kind of dawned on me this morning when I was just looking at just transits. I was just looking at, where the moon was this morning. I felt totally revived with the moon in Aries. The moon in Pisces was beautiful, but was very personally. I find a full moon in Pisces quite overwhelming. It's Yeah, it's just a very sensitive place for me. That moon in Pisces, it always seems to evoke very, very deep material that's quite painful in a lot of ways because it correlates to the biggest loss I had in my life. So it's a very emotional time. I know that everyone's felt pretty emotional actually in terms of the people that I interact with and so forth. It's Pisces full moons are quite weird. It's a bit like the Twilight Zone. You don't know where you are really. But anyway, the moon's in Aries now, so the energy I find that transition from Aries to sorry from Pisces to Aries is just such an obvious transition. They couldn't be more different from each other, the nature of those archetypes. So the shift is really obvious. It's not obscure, it's not subtle, it's really clear. And I felt that this morning when I woke up and the moon had gone into Aries, and I just got into my full Aries mode and just got into this, you know, charged day full of things. I did a reading for a client just before I sat down to do this. Now I'm doing this. After this, I'm going to do some study on some material that I'm studying. So Moon in Aries just gets my whole vibration activated, possibly because I'm a Sun in Aries. But yeah, that's what sort of inspired this session, this offering to you guys. So I hope it's useful, and I look forward to seeing you guys very, very soon. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen. Sending you all so much love, so much blessings. And yeah, just take just one final thing. These energies, because they are so dynamic, and the cardinal component is so much about action and initiation. Um, some wisdom to bring through this would be to take a step back, you know, be a little bit more patient with certain things. And the impulses are strong, but patience is a virtue. That's not, that saying hasn't been just said for some random unbeknown reason. It's a very wise statement. So yeah, we do just need to take a little step back, and as frustrated as we may be with a lot of different things relative to our personal life, or the world at large. So I'll see you guys soon. Much love. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.